The darkness of night had not yet completely lifted when a faint light blossomed in the sky over Ouagadougou. It was that moment when the city begins to wake, half asleep. But the atmosphere that day was different from usual days, as if some hidden secret lay in the air. The streets were silent, but hearts carried an unknown restlessness. A little while later, the birds began to chirp, women lifted water jars from their homes and went out, and shopkeepers opened their small wooden stalls. Someone placed a taba to fry millet, and the smell spread through the whole market. Children, wearing their old uniforms, ran laughing and playing towards school. Everything seemed outwardly normal, but that calm was a veil of deception, a veil that would soon be lifted. Meanwhile, in the National Security Room at the heart of the city, President Ibrahim Traoré sat. There was the fatigue of sleepless nights in his eyes, but on his lips, the silence of patience. Spread across the desk in front of him were the files that reported insurgent attacks had decreased, farmers were promising better harvests, and schools in small villages were reopening. Traoré took a slow breath and said quietly, "We are turning the tide." But he knew the real war was not over yet. Peace in the game of power is always temporary. This moment was one of pride for the president, but also a burden. It was not the burden of the throne, but of responsibility. Hope was awakening in the city, but at the same time, far from the city in the dense forest, another world existed. In an old villa whose windows were covered with heavy curtains, people sat around a table. Some wore suits, some military uniforms, and cruelty hid in all their eyes. The dim light of a bulb fell upon their faces and made the atmosphere even more terrifying. "We tried everything, imposed restrictions, spread propaganda, instigated rebellion. But he does not bow," said a man with a European accent. Another ground his teeth and said, "His army is with him. The people have turned his name into a chant. He has become a symbol." The third tapped the table with his finger. His words were cold. "We must break the symbol, and a symbol is formed in the heart. Break the heart." Silence spread through the room. A moment later, someone said softly, "Target his mother." The sentence froze the air. The others looked at one another, then nodded slightly. Cruel smiles crossed their faces. This decision was more dangerous than any missile or tank. It was a decision that would make a son's heart bleed. In the darkness of night, the conspiracy was set, and this was a war that would no longer be fought on borders. This war was between a mother's love and a son's courage. Morning was breaking in Ouagadougou, but in the heart of the forest, a new game born from the darkness of night was taking shape. President Traoré dreamed of light for his people, and the enemy planned to deepen their darkness. The game was silent, but its blows were deeper than any bomb, and the story turned its first corner, a turn that would change Burkina Faso's fate. In the middle of the forest stood an old villa, dilapidated outwardly, but a den of secret plans inside. Old guns hung on the walls. On the wooden table in the center of the room lay maps, diaries, and laptops. A bulb hanging from the ceiling cast a faint, trembling light. The people seated there were not ordinary farmers or soldiers. They were mercenaries whose eyes showed no loyalty to any homeland or principle, only the shine of banknotes and the agenda of their enemies. Many among them were former Special Forces soldiers who, after taking off their uniforms, had become dealers in weapons. Now they dressed in dusty clothes to appear as village farmers. One had a hoe slung over his shoulder, another held a basket. But the truth was that they were all merchants of death. Their eyes hid behind long-range binoculars. The map was opened, and a scarred-faced commander pointed out routes with his hand. "The guard changes every 2 hours. This exit route, if the truck leaves from the park spot, it crosses the forest in 5 minutes. Another wrote the time in his notebook. "The best time to cut the power is 1:17 a.m. At that time, the village lights weaken, and the guards are not alert." Everyone present inclined their heads. At the other end of the table, a local man spoke in a low voice. "First, we must see when the president's mother is at home, when she comes into the courtyard. Her routines must be in our hands." Hearing this, another produced a report. It recorded Madame Traoré's daily routines. Early in the morning, she would sit in the courtyard drinking tea, play with the children, and then go under the old neem tree to pray. All this information had been provided by the two soldiers who took bribes. The commander's old wound by his eye made his cruelty more pronounced. He tossed the binoculars onto the table and said in a cold tone, "Tonight, be ready." At that very moment in the city, President Ibrahim Traoré was on the phone asking after his mother's well-being. His voice had softened. "Mother, how are you?" On the other end, his mother replied briefly, "I am fine. I only pray that you remain free from pride, my son. May power not blind you." Traoré fell silent, as if a deep pang had struck his heart. His mother's prayers were his shield, but he did not know that shadows were spreading around his mother's house at that very moment. In the villa, the conspiracy had deepened. Someone proposed another plan. What if the attack fails? The agent with the European accent laughed. "We have prepared a fake video set. If anything goes wrong in the real operation, we will show the president a video and make him bow. The video will play on his mother and children, but we will add hints of fear and captivity." Hearing this, everyone was satisfied. Another layer of deception had been prepared. The enemy knew that the blow of a gun strikes the body, but the blow of a fake image and voice strikes the heart. The night's plan was complete. Now they only awaited the clock. At 1 o'clock in the night, the power would be cut, the bribed guards would close their eyes, and then the black trucks would roll into the courtyard. Flashbangs would explode, screams would echo, and a mother who upheld centuries of honor and dignity would be turned into a weapon against her son. The entire conspiracy had one aim: to break Ibrahim Traoré. If he bowed, the country would begin a path to slavery. If he did not bow, they would wound his heart and break it. Night's darkness lay thick near the village, the same darkness that was about to descend on a mother's courtyard. Dawn was near. A faint redness appeared in the sky, as if someone had brushed red ink across blue paper. In the old courtyard of the village, Tusiana, Madame Traoré had woken up, as per her daily habit. Her feet were bare and she held an earthen cup filled with bitter but soothing tea. Her white dupatta fluttered gently in the breeze. She walked slowly across the courtyard and sat down under the old neem tree. Her grandson came running. His feet snagged in the dirt and he stumbled a little, but Madame caught him at once. Laughing, she said, "Run slowly, little bird. Even birds fall if they fly out of control." The granddaughter drew a circle in the earth nearby and began to play the flute. A small laugh rang off the courtyard walls. A moment of peace filled Madame's eyes, but it was fleeting. Beyond the courtyard wall, the grass was tall. There, a man crouched with binoculars. There was neither innocence nor feeling in his eyes, only the cold seal of a plan. He whispered into the earpiece, "Target confirmed. Movement will increase in the evening." Another voice replied, "Consider it. An eagle is in the nest. Cut the power at 1 a.m. Madame did not know any of this. She was in her own world. When the call to prayer rose from the village mosque at dusk, she bowed her head and prayed, "Protect my son from pride. Protect my grandchildren from fear. May this land never have to see blood again." Her words of prayer dissolved into the air. A hired soldier standing nearby paused for a moment. The call to prayer reached his ears. He closed his eyes, but the next moment turned his face away. He knew that prayer and the call to prayer would not change his agenda. Still, somewhere deep, a faint knock must have touched his heart. The children playing brought the little flute into the house. Madame glanced back but did not worry much. Who knew that this flute would later become a secret signal in the key to salvation? The sky was completely clear, but the air carried a strange weight, as if the earth itself had held its breath. Doves suddenly began to flutter noisily on a branch of the neem tree. Madame looked up at the sky. For a moment her heart felt uneasy, but she quickly took a deep breath and composed herself. An old shepherd passed by the edge of the village with his goats. As always, he moved forward playing his flute. What did he know that at night the wheels of black trucks would rumble along the same path, and that the road would later turn into a slaughter? Meanwhile, a hired soldier hiding in the grass drew a knife and carved a mark, X, into the tree. This was their secret sign. It meant the next attack would not come through the front gate, but from the path behind the wall. Madame Traoré had no idea that the innocent laughter and the children's running in her courtyard were being counted by strange eyes behind the trees. Every movement of hers, every prayer, every smile was being woven into the enemy's plan. As the sun began to set, an odd heaviness increased in the air. Villagers lit lamps in their homes. Children, tired from playing, fell asleep. But Madame Traore still sat under the neem tree watching the sky. A strange worry had awakened in her heart, yet she knew that a mother's prayers are greater than every darkness. But that night, the darkness was not only to descend upon the sky. This darkness was about to fall upon the heart of the land as well. It was nighttime. An unusual silence had settled over the village. Crickets seemed to be giving some deep message in their sound. Madame Traore slept in her room. Her grandson and granddaughter lay beside her in peaceful sleep. Guards paced outside the courtyard. Everything appeared as usual. But that calm was only a momentary veil, which would be torn apart in the next few moments. Exactly at 12:17, the village's electricity suddenly went out. Darkness spread across the whole area. A guard shouted in panic, "The power's out!" Before his words were even finished, a loud explosion shook the village gate. The iron gate screamed as it broke and 3 black trucks drove in. The screech of their tires tore the air. Headlights were off, but the masked attackers with night vision goggles could see clearly in the dark. In the same instant, flashbang explosions burst light and noise into the air. The guards fell screaming. Some returned fire but could not hold out long. 2 traitor soldiers who had already colluded with the enemy laid down their weapons and cowered to one side. The remaining guards fought bravely, but the difference in numbers and preparation was evident. Madame Traore woke with a start. The window glass shattered, smoke spread inside, and the children began to cry. She cried out in panic, "Where are my children? Where are they?" Masked men entered. One pulled a quilt over the children and took them outside. Another bound Madame's hands behind her back. She screamed, "Let them go! They are only children!" But a heavy voice thundered, "We want your daughter-in-law. Where is she?" Madame said nothing. Her eyes only searched for her grandson and granddaughter. The enemy pressed the barrel of a gun to her temple. At that moment, on the other side of the room, the window glass smashed violently. The president's wife had broken through the glass with all her strength and run out. Her feet and legs were cut by the glass. Blood flowed. But without looking back, she ran into the dark bushes of the garden. Thorns caught at her clothes and skin, but she did not stop. With every step, the same voice echoed in her heart, "Save the children. Get word to Ibrahim." Back in the room, Madame Traore stood on her courage. Tears filled her eyes, but her lips were silent. The leader approached, leaned in, and said softly, "Tell your son that we have his blood. If he does not bow, first the children, then your life." In less than 6 minutes, the whole attack was complete. The masked soldiers forced the children and Madame into the trucks and left. Smoke, broken windows, and the bodies of guards, drenched in blood, remained in the courtyard. The village atmosphere became a screaming silence. A short while later, in Ouagadougou's presidential control room, a red light began to flash. Alarms rang. A security officer ran in and opened a file. A message flashed on the screen. "Resign within 72 hours. Otherwise, watch the fate of each one." President Ibrahim Traore rose from his bed and read the message. His hand trembled. His eyes froze. He read the message again. The words were the same, the threat the same, but the effect was like someone had plunged a dagger into his heart. All his life he had faced enemies many times. But today's war was not of bullets. This war was an attack upon the most precious relationships of his heart. Now the fight had not remained on the front, it had come into the home. The war room of the presidential palace was filled with darkness in the glare of the red light. Screens on the walls flickered one after another. Military officers, intelligence personnel, and ministers were all in the same room. But the atmosphere was such that it seemed everyone's breath had been stopped. Only the thrum of helicopters and the ringing of phones broke the silence. On the screen, a video was frozen. Madame Traore sat tied to a chair. Blood flowed from her forehead, white hair stuck to her brow. Her hands were bound behind her. Beside her, the 2 children sat, terrified, their eyes full of tears and fear. This sight alone was enough to petrify everyone in the room. President Ibrahim Traore stood straight, but his heart was breaking from within. He stared at the frozen image on the screen. Suddenly, the video began to play. A masked figure appeared. His voice was artificial, as if altered by a machine. "Captain Ibrahim Traore, you call yourself a protector? You claim to be the standard bearer of the revolution? Look, now your revolution stands before its own blood." The man stepped aside. Another masked man brought a knife close to the children. He held the blade near the child's neck. The child's sobs broke the silence of the room. "You have 72 hours. Leave the throne. Resign. Otherwise, first your son, then your daughter, and finally your mother. One by one, the land will be stained with everyone's blood." The video ended. The screen went black. A death-like silence spread through the room. No one had the courage to speak. President Traore's hands were trembling. His fists were clenched so hard that blood began to seep from his fingers. Yet there were no tears in his eyes. There was anger, there was fear, and a state of being that was breaking the heart of a father and a son. General Ndao, who was his old comrade and closest friend, spoke softly. "Sir, we have checked the video repeatedly. There are some small signs." The president turned his head toward him. Ndao paused the image on the screen and zoomed in on a particular moment. "Listen to this. There is the rattling of a diesel generator in the background. It's not ordinary. It's the same as those used with water pumps in border farmlands. And that sound, that's the cry of a bird, the red-horned bill. It is found only in the eastern strips forests." A beat skipped in the president's heart. The sounds of his mother's courtyard and those voices began to echo in his mind. At that moment, a young intelligence officer said, "Sir, for a moment in the video, we can also hear the tin-tin of a child's flute, the same flute that last year we gave to children as a gift with a GPS chip. If the signal is alive, we can reach the location." This news brought a faint light to the faces in the room, but the storm in President Ibrahim Traore's heart still raged. He knew this could also be a trap. What if all this was meant to lure them into a snare? He stood silently, staring at the screen. Two voices fought within him. One said, "Save your family, the nation can be taken care of later." The other voice was harsh. "If you bow and leave the throne, this country will be enslaved forever. Your children's future will be finished." The struggle burned within the president like fire. His mother's prayer rang in his ears. "Protect my son from pride. Protect my grandchildren from fear." He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and said softly, "They want me to bow. I will not bow." A new life ran through the room. All the officers looked at one another. They understood that the president had made his decision. Yet a fear still lived in the president's heart. What if this was all a deception? What if the video was fake and the real place was somewhere else? That question gnawed at his heart. But he knew there was no time to step back now. Now the war was not only on the field, but in the heart and in courage. In the faint light of morning, the fatigue of the night was clear on President Ibrahim Traore's face. He had not slept all night. Two wars raged inside him, one a father's war to save his mother and children, and the other a president's war to save the whole nation from slavery. But now the time was decisive. He knew that if he showed weakness, the enemy would win, and if he stood firm, perhaps his family would have to pay the price. That morning, the president decided to come before the nation. He ordered his guards to set up cameras and broadcast live. Tired but with steady steps, he took the stage. Only a few journalists and military officers were present in front of him, but through the live broadcast, the whole of Burkina Faso was watching. His voice was heavy, but each word fell like a rock. "They have taken my mother. They have imprisoned my children. They think Burkina Faso will kneel. They think I will leave the throne." He paused for a moment. Millions of eyes beyond the cameras watched him. "Listen, we will not bow. I will not bow. Those who want to break me by taking my blood, hear this. I am coming myself. I will bring my family and I will keep my country free." At these words, the streets erupted. People came out of their homes. Chants rose in the markets. The same cry echoed everywhere. "Burkina Faso will not bow. Traore will not bow." Inside the palace, it was time for planning. General Ndao spread maps across the Great Hall. Drone footage, satellite images, and soldiers' reports were laid out on the table. A secret unit was called Division Eclair. It was the unit known only in whispers, experts in raids, covert operations, and rescuing targets. These were the soldiers called the Shadows. Endao marked routes on the map. This first route is straight but filled with landmines. The enemy wants us to come here and be trapped. The second route is long, across hills and a river, but it is concealed. The president studied the map closely. At that moment, a startling report arrived. A soldier who had earlier betrayed them by taking a bribe from the enemy came running under the weight of conscience. He reached the palace gate wounded and said, "Mr. President, the real hideout is not what you think. The first camp is fake. The real place is across the river, in the old mine tunnels." Everyone in the room looked at one another. The news was certainly important, but could it be a new trap? The president thought for a few moments, then slammed his hand on the table. "We have no time to waste. If this information is true, we have a chance. And if it's a deception, we must go even then." Now said, "Sir, don't insist on going into the field yourself. The risk is too great. We'll send the army." But there was a fire of resolve in the president's eyes. "My mother and my children are there. I cannot throw others into this fire. Where my own are, I will go there myself first." Silence fell in the room at those words. No argument remained. The soldiers stood together and saluted. Night preparations began. Eclair's young men checked their weapons. Drones were being launched. Marksmen took their positions. In everyone's heart was the thought that this was not just a rescue mission, but a matter of the nation's honor. President Ibrahim Traore went to his private room and looked at pictures of his mother and children. In one picture, he was sitting in his mother's lap. In another, the children sat laughing on his back. He kissed the picture and whispered softly, "I am coming. And this time it is not just my test, it is the nation's trial." Between the village and the forest, the air seemed to be holding its breath. Everything awaited a great explosion. Night had deepened. Through the clouds, the moon would peer, then hide again. There was a strange dampness and weight in the air, as if the forest itself knew of the coming turmoil. Eclair's young men moved through the tree shadows as if mingling with the earth. Their steps were light, breaths controlled, and in their eyes only one purpose: bring the president's mother and children back alive. President Ibrahim Traore was at the front. With him were General Endao and a few best soldiers. Drones flew above. Snipers on the ground had taken their positions. Silence was everywhere, but every heartbeat was fast. A short distance away, an old building came into view. Windows were broken, moss clung to the walls, and a heavy guard stood outside. The light was low, but guards were spread all around. Seeing this, Endao whispered in his ear, "This is it, sir. This is their camp." But there was doubt in the president's eyes. He examined the surroundings carefully. Something was off. Eclair's men crept up close to the building. On one wall, a mark had been made. X, the same mark the traitorous soldier had reported. They signaled to each other and slowly began cutting through the wall. Suddenly, the ground answered with a loud explosion. Landmines. In an instant, fire and smoke spread through the air. 2 soldiers were severely wounded. The rest quickly fell back. Gunfire began. The enemy guards moved immediately. There was chaos, firing, and screams everywhere. Endao shouted, "This was a trap! This place is fake!" The president kept hearing his mother's prayer over and over. "Protect my son from pride. Protect my grandchildren from fear." His heart pounded. Had they been deceived? Amid that chaos, a dull sound came from a radio operator's headphones. At first, everyone thought it accidental, but then the same sound became clear. It was the tone of the children's flute, the very flute that had been played in the courtyard in the evening. The same flute that had the GPS chip. The president immediately said, "Trace that signal. This is the real location." The team opened the system. The signal pointed straight to an old mountain tunnel across the river. They repositioned. Passing through the trees of the forest, they reached the riverbank. The water roared, but the soldiers threw ropes and crossed. On the other side was darkness and dense silence. At the foot of the mountain, they found an old gate, rusted but with light flickering from within. The president took a deep breath and gripped his rifle tightly. "This is it. This is where they are." As they entered, dampness and the smell of diesel greeted them. Old mining tools lay scattered on the walls. From somewhere, a faint sound of children crying reached them. In a narrow corridor, the president came face to face with the masked leader. In his hand was the president's daughter, a knife held to her throat. Cruelty and mockery shone in his eyes. "One more step and I'll kill her right here." The president's voice was like ice. "Touch her and I'll bury you here." For a few moments, they stared into each other's eyes. Then the masked man suddenly fired a shot. But at that same moment, 3 shots rang out together. The leader fell to the ground. Eclair's soldiers rushed in. The doors were broken open. Madame Traoré was tied in a corner, her face wounded but her eyes bright. The children screamed at the sight of their father and ran to cling to his neck. The president went to his mother and untied the ropes. Tears came to his eyes. The mother said softly, "I told you, you will not remain just a soldier. You have become a protector." But bullets were still being fired outside. The second mouth of the tunnel opened, and another group of the enemy began entering. The fight was not over yet. Inside the tunnel, the tears of joy had not even dried when the roar of gunfire sounded again from outside. Dust particles fell from the ceiling to the ground. A soldier put his hand to his ear and said, "Sir, a second detachment is coming. They have surrounded the outer mouth." Madame Traoré hugged her grandson and granddaughter to her chest. A whisper left her lips. "O Lord, veil this for us." President Ibrahim gripped his rifle and handed the children to a young man. Determination was in his eyes, though a storm raged inside his heart. He knew this battle would demand more blood. With an explosion, the tunnel's second gate shattered. A line of masked men surged in. Each held automatic rifles, eyes full of bloodthirsty intent. Fire began immediately. The bullet's sound bounced off the tunnel's narrow walls, deafening. Eclair's young men did not fall back. They stood firm. One soldier let loose a full burst from his machine gun. Another threw a hand grenade. The explosion blew 2 enemy men away, but more surged in their place. In that chaos, a man stepped forward. It was the same soldier who had taken the bribe, but had returned under the weight of conscience. He threw off his jacket onto the ground and shouted, "Move the president and the children forward. I will hold their way." He unleashed a rain of bullets with both hands. The enemy's attention fixed on him. In moments, several bullets struck his body, but he held on until his last breath. His cry echoed through the air and then he fell to the ground. But his sacrifice opened a path. General Endau signaled at once, "Now, get everyone out." The soldiers threw ropes and broke through the rear wall of the tunnel. There was a sloped path leading into the valley. They placed the mother and children in the middle and moved forward. The enemy still fired from behind. A helicopter hovered above, but the gorge was narrow. The pilot said on the radio, "Come at least 20 meters up, otherwise I won't be able to lift." Bullets were still landing nearby. At that moment, the wind shifted. The smoke raised by the explosions drifted toward the enemy. Their vision blurred. Their aim faltered. Madame raised her trembling hands and said, "This is the veil of prayer. This is not coincidence." Eclair's young men moved quickly forward. One by one, everyone was pulled up by rope. The president stepped up last, but before that, he looked back once at the enemy. The same icy hardness was in his eyes. "You have touched my blood. Now I will pursue you to my last breath." The helicopter descended and lifted them all. Bullets hit the metal with a clinking sound, but none penetrated. As the chopper rose, a chain of landmines on the ground caught fire. A mighty explosion shook the entire gorge. Many of the enemy men were burned in the flames. The helicopter climbed higher. The children clung to the president's chest, trembling. Tears filled Madame's eyes, but a prayerful smile rested on her lips. She said softly, "I told you, you will not remain just a soldier. Become a protector. And look, today you have saved everyone." The president kissed his mother's forehead. For a moment, peace settled in his eyes, but the question still burned in his heart. Who concocted all this? Where did this conspiracy come from? The helicopter flew eastward. Below, the forest was wrapped in fire and smoke. Night's darkness was ending, but the president knew the real darkness still remained. The darkness hiding within his own ranks. 3 days passed, But the echoes of that night's bullets and explosions still lingered in Ouagadougou's skies. Markets did open, but people's conversations had only one subject: the miraculous rescue of the president's mother and children. Some said it was the army's skill, some said it was the mother's prayers. But on every tongue was the same sentence: Traoré did not bow, he could not be made to bow. The day of the National Assembly was set. The Great Hall's seats were filled. Members sat in silence, and unease pervaded the air. Everyone knew the president was about to do something large. But what? No one knew. The doors opened. President Ibrahim Traoré entered. His steps were firm, and there was fire in his eyes. But the sight behind him struck everyone like lightning. 12 men, all chained, advanced surrounded by soldiers. These were not ordinary prisoners. They were the faces people had seen in high positions until yesterday. Politicians, business chiefs, a former general, and some who had once been called patriots. Today, shame was on their heads and defeat in their eyes. Whispers echoed through the hall. Someone said, "How is this possible? They were all from within?" The president stopped at the center of the hall and looked at everyone. They remained silent. Then at his signal, the large screen lit up. A recording began to play. Scenes from the dark mansion, secret meetings in closed rooms, calls with external agencies, videos of money transactions. Each new scene shook the hearts of the assembly members. Then a phrase ran that petrified everyone seated in the hall. "The woman and children are in motion, location confirmed." That was the exact phrase the planners had said in their conversation. As soon as it played, the hall fell silent. People looked at one another. It was no longer mere suspicion, it was reality. The president spoke softly but like an explosion. They did not fire bullets. They used passwords, promises, and dollars. They opened the door to the enemy. They tried to wound my heart. But this war was not mine alone. It was the war of all of you. He looked at the criminals and stared at each one. You sold your land, you sold your nation, and you pawned my blood into the hands of the enemy. You thought I would bow, but listen, I did not bow, and this nation will never bow. A roar rose through the hall. Some applauded, some had tears on their faces. Many members bowed their heads. Then the president announced, "Bring all of them before the courts. The people must know what a traitor looks like." Soldiers began taking the 12 prisoners out of the hall. Some were silent, some were screaming, but now no one was listening to their cries. At that moment, the president announced another decision. From today, there will be a national stipend for the children of martyrs. Every child whose father gave his life for this land will not be deprived of education and the right to life. From today, the powers will be curtailed. Presidential power will be limited so that no individual can ever sell the nation on a whim. And from today onward, one day each year, Resistance Day, will be observed. These words left the hall and reached the streets. A red banner was hung on the palace that read, "The people cannot be kidnapped." Processions took to the cities, and in the villages, women wept and prayed. An old man said, "We thought the president was just a soldier, but he is the shield of the whole nation." Meanwhile, General Now came close to the president. His voice was low, but a new fear hid within it. "Sir." One of those 12 refused to confess. He says the real mastermind is still free. He saw everything, and he left us a sign. The president's eyes narrowed. "What sign?" Nandao pulled a small statuette from his pocket, a horse carved from elephant tusk, shiny yet mysterious. He left it and said, "The game is not over. This is only the beginning." Waves of joy ran through the hall, but a new darkness settled in the president's heart. He understood that this war was not yet over. The enemy was still hiding somewhere in the shadows. Time passed, but that night was etched on Ouagadougou's heart, the night in which the mother, the children, and the president were pulled back from death's brink. The city slowly returned to its routine. Schools reopened, buyers returned to the markets, women began filling water pots again. But behind that calm lay a heavy price of sacrifice. 47 soldiers never returned from that night. Some were young sons, some fathers, some husbands. All were offered upon their land. Mourning filled their homes. Women sat shrouded in black. Children held their fathers' pictures and asked, "Mother, when will they come?" The mother had no answer. President Ibrahim Traoré himself visited those homes. He sat on the ground, held the hands of widows, and laid his hand on the children's heads. A mother, weeping, said, "My son gave his life for you." The president said quietly, "No, he did not die for me. He died for the soul of this country." Reforms began inside the palace. A new law was made stating that the education of every martyr's child would be the state's responsibility. Each year a day, Resistance Day, would be observed so that no sacrifice would be forgotten. The president also curtailed his own power, amending the Constitution to limit presidential authorities. All this was unexpected, but necessary to win the people's hearts. People began to say, "This man is not merely a president, he is the father of the nation." But inner peace had not yet come. General Ndau's words echoed in the president's mind. One of them said, "The real mastermind is still free. He left us an elephant tusk horse." That phrase sank into the president's heart like a dagger. Who was the one watching everything from behind the curtain? Was this game truly over? A month later, the president suddenly disappeared. No convoy, no bodyguard, no official announcement. For 3 days, no one knew where he was. Then news came that he had been seen alone on the peak of Mount Zinar. There stood an old acacia tree planted by his grandfather. The president wore his old cadet uniform. In his hands was a small wooden box. He knelt down. When he opened the box, there were a few items inside: a military medal, a blood-stained handkerchief given by a martyred soldier, the letter his mother had written after her release from captivity, and a bullet, the bullet that had passed close by him in the forest. With bare hands, the president dug into the earth and buried the box. Then he looked at the sky and said softly, "This is my pledge. If I forget the purpose, I have no right to lead." He sat there in silence for many hours. No speech, no slogans, only silence and the sound of the wind. A silence that became an oath. When he returned to the city, his steps were light. A deep smile had settled on his face and peace had come into his eyes. A young soldier asked on the way, "Captain, what will happen now?" The president answered without hesitation, "Now we will build, we will protect, and we will remember." People saw that the president was no longer merely one who gave orders. He had become a listener, a sharer of grief and a sharer of dreams. In the markets, children called his name as they played, women prayed for him, and the elders said, "He may have lost blood, but he did not lose direction." But the game of darkness was not yet completely over. One night in a distant embassy room, an unknown man sat by the window. He placed a small ivory horse on the table and gazed at the city lights. The same cruelty gleamed in his eyes that had burned in the villa's room when the conspiracy was born. He whispered, "This round is over, but the game is not finished yet." Ouagadougou slept, but the president was awake, and a nation that remains awake can never be kidnapped.